Commander Jenna Rhodes knew she should be dead. The vacuum of space had a funny way of making that point clear. No oxygen, minus 270 degrees Celsius, and enough radiation to cook a person from the inside out. Yet here she stood, or rather floated, in the debris field of what used to be Deep Space Colony Artemis, breathing perfectly fine without a suit. The last thing she remembered was the colony's hull breach, a catastrophic failure that sent hundreds of colonists into the void. She had stayed behind, manually overriding the emergency protocols to save as many as possible in the escape pods. The metal gave way beneath her feet, and then, nothing. Until now. Fascinating. Came a voice from everywhere and nowhere at once. You simply refused. Jenna spun in the zero gravity, searching for the source. Among the floating debris and distant stars, a figure materialized. Neither male nor female, neither young nor old, wearing what appeared to be a suit made of starlight and shadow. "I'm Death," it said matter-of-factly, as if introducing itself at a dinner party. "And you, Commander Rhodes, are becoming quite the inconvenience." Jenna's military training kicked in, pushing aside the impossibility of the situation. "My people are safe," Death interrupted, gesturing to the distant escape pods. "Most of them, anyway. The ones you managed to save. Quite impressive, really. But that's not why I'm here." "Then why?" Death moved closer, and Jenna noticed that the debris seemed to age centuries wherever the entity passed. "Because you did something unprecedented. When I came to collect you, your soul simply declined. No bargaining, no pleading, just a flat refusal at such a fundamental level that even I couldn't override it." Jenna remembered that moment now, the sensation of being pulled toward something vast and dark, and every fiber of her being screaming no. Not from fear, but from pure, stubborn determination. Her people needed her. Her mission wasn't complete, and so she had pushed back against the inevitable. "That's not possible," Jenna said, watching her breath fog in the vacuum that should have killed her. "Precisely." Death's face showed something between amusement and concern. "In all of existence, souls have bargained, begged, or accepted, but none have simply refused to acknowledge my authority altogether. You've created quite the paradox, Commander." Around them, the debris field began to change. Pieces of the destroyed colony moved in reverse, some reforming into their original shapes. Time itself seemed uncertain around Jenna. "The natural order requires balance," Death continued. "Your refusal is creating ripples. Reality doesn't quite know what to do with you. And now, I'm forced to deal with this situation personally." Jenna squared her shoulders, the same determination that had denied Death now fueling her response. "I won't apologize for saving my people." "No, I don't suppose you would." Death's form flickered like a candle in wind. "But you need to understand the consequences of your choice. Your continued existence violates fundamental laws. Laws that exist for good reason. Laws can be changed," Jenna countered, surprising herself with her boldness. Death's laughter was like distant stellar winds, spoken like a true human, always pushing boundaries, questioning rules that have existed since the universe drew its first breath. The entity moved closer, and Jenna felt the cold emptiness of space grow somehow colder. "Very well, Commander. Let's see how long you can maintain this defiance. Consider this a formal challenge. You've denied me once, but now I'll be watching, waiting. And we'll see if your determination holds when you understand exactly what you're defying." The debris around them suddenly accelerated, time rushing forward. Jenna saw flashes of possible futures, worlds where death held no power, but at terrible costs. Civilizations crumbling under the weight of immortality, planets groaning with the burden of souls that refuse to move on. "Watch closely, Commander Rhodes," Death said, its form beginning to fade. "You've started something unprecedented, and now you'll have to see it through. I'll be seeing you again. Many times, I suspect." As Death vanished, Jenna felt gravity reassert itself. She was standing in an emergency shelter on Mars Colony, surrounded by the survivors she'd saved. According to the clock, only minutes had passed since the Artemis disaster, but the weight of death's challenge hung heavy in the recycled air. She looked at her hands, still solid, still alive, and made a decision. If death wanted a challenge, it would get one. But she would face it on her terms, protecting her people, and maybe, just maybe, changing the rules of existence itself. The debris around them suddenly accelerated, time rushing forward. Jenna saw flashes of possible futures, worlds where death held no power, but at terrible costs. Civilizations crumbling under the weight of immortality, planets groaning with the burden of souls that refuse to move on. Watch closely, Commander Rhodes, Death said, its form beginning to fade. You've started something unprecedented, and now you'll have to see it through. I'll be seeing you again. Many times, I suspect. As Death vanished, Jenna felt gravity reassert itself. She was standing in an emergency shelter on Mars Colony, surrounded by the survivors she'd saved. According to the clock, only minutes had passed since the Artemis disaster, but the weight of death's challenge hung heavy in the recycled air. She looked at her hands, still solid, still alive, and made a decision. If death wanted a challenge, it would get one. But she would face it on her terms, protecting her people, and maybe, just maybe, changing the rules of existence itself. Outside the shelter's windows, the Martian dust storms raged, and somewhere in that cosmic wind, Jenna swore she could hear death's laughter. The game had begun, and the stakes were nothing less than the nature of mortality itself. The first sign that something was wrong came 3 weeks after the Artemis incident. Commander Jenna Rhodes stood in the Mars Colony medical bay, watching Dr. Marcus Rivera attempt to pronounce time of death for the 5th time that day. The patient, an elderly colonist who had suffered fatal injuries during landing, kept breathing despite complete organ failure. "I don't understand," Dr. Rivera muttered, running another scan. "By every medical standard, he should be dead." Jenna finished, the word heavy in her mouth. She hadn't told anyone about her encounter with death, but its effects were becoming impossible to ignore. The medical bay lights flickered, and in their reflection on the window, Jenna caught a glimpse of that familiar starlight shadow figure. When she turned, death wasn't there, but its voice echoed in her mind. "Ripples, Commander. I warned you about ripples." Later that night, in her quarters, Jenna received an unexpected visitor. Lieutenant Kai Patel, one of her best security officers, stood at attention with an unusual request. "Commander, we need to talk about Kuwait City, about what happened there 6 years ago." Jenna felt her chest tighten. "That incident is classified." "Ma'am, I know because I was there too. Or rather, I should have died there." Kai's eyes held a familiar determination. "Just like I should have died on 3 other occasions, and just like you should have died on Artemis." The revelation hit Jenna like a gravitational shift. She wasn't alone. Others had done what she did, refused death's call. But while her defiance was recent, Kai had been doing it for years. "How many of us are there?" she asked. "More than death would like," came another voice. From the shadows stepped Dr. Isabella Reyes, the colony's quantum physicist. "We call ourselves the Persistent, those who, for various reasons, have refused to comply with the natural order." Over the next few hours, Jenna learned of an underground network of people who had defied death, some through sheer will, others through accidents of quantum probability, but all marked by the same stubborn refusal to yield when their time came. "But there are rules," Isabella explained, her hands moving as she sketched equations in the air, literal equations, glowing with an impossible light. "Death isn't just a force, it's a fundamental aspect of reality. Every time one of us refuses to die, we create quantum distortions, small at first, but they add up." The patient in medical bay, Jenna realized. "That's one of these distortions." Kai nodded grimly. "Your recent defiance has amplified the effect. The natural order is becoming unstable around the colony. Soon, it won't just be the dying who can't die. It'll be the dead who refuse to stay dead." Outside the window, The Martian landscape shifted like a mirage, occasionally showing glimpses of other possible Mars colonies, ones where different choices had been made, different lives lived or lost. Death visited you, didn't it? Isabella asked. Personally? Yes, it issued a challenge. Then we don't have much time, Kai said, checking his tablet. Death only appears personally when something fundamental is about to change. The last time it happened was in Kuwait City, when I first refused. The consequences. He trailed off, his expression haunted. We've learned to manage our condition, Isabella continued, to minimize the ripples. But your defiance was different, Commander. You didn't just refuse to die. You rejected the very concept of death's authority. And now that rejection is spreading. As if to emphasize her point, alarms began blaring throughout the colony. Dr. Rivera's voice came over the comm. Commander, we have a situation. The morgue, the bodies, they're all showing signs of neural activity. Jenna shared a look with her newfound allies. How do we stop this? We don't, Isabella said firmly. We can't. But we can guide it. Death operates by rules, ancient, complex rules that even it must follow. If we can understand those rules, we can change them. Jenna finished, the idea taking root. Or break them entirely, Kai added. But death won't make it easy. It's been playing this game for billions of years. The alarms continued to wail, and through the window, Jenna saw something impossible. Plants growing on the Martian surface, withering and regrowing in endless cycles. Life and death locked in a broken dance. Then we'll need to play smarter, Jenna decided. Dr. Reyes, I need everything you know about quantum immortality. Lieutenant Patel, gather the other persistence. If death wants to make this personal, we'll show it exactly what happens when humans decide to change the rules. In the distance, a shadow shaped like starlight watched, and the Martian winds carried the sound of anticipation. The game was evolving, and with it, the very fabric of existence began to bend. Death had issued its challenge, but it was about to learn that humans didn't just break rules, they rewrote them entirely. And somewhere, in the space between moments, reality held its breath, waiting to see which would prove stronger, the ancient laws of mortality, or human determination to forge their own destiny. The quantum destabilization began on a Tuesday. Commander Jenna Rhodes watched from the colony's observation deck as reality fractured like broken glass across the Martian surface. In one shard, dust storms raged eternal. In another, green vegetation sprawled impossibly across red soil. And in yet another, the ruins of an ancient civilization stretched toward a purple sky. Beautiful, isn't it? Death's voice came from behind her. Chaos always is, at first. Jenna didn't turn. You're here to gloat. To observe. Your little group of persistence has been quite innovative. Death moved beside her, its form flickering through different appearances. But you haven't considered the cost. As if on cue, Dr. Rivera's voice crackled over the comm. Commander, we've lost contact with Earth. All signals are being reflected back from multiple timelines. And there's something else. In the medical bay, Jenna found Isabella and Kai already waiting. The quantum physicist's hands trembled as she manipulated a holographic display showing hundreds of overlapping wavelengths. It's not just the dead who can't die anymore, Isabella explained. The temporal anomalies are affecting causality itself. People are remembering lives they never lived, deaths they never died. The barrier between possible and impossible is dissolving. Lieutenant Patil pointed to a security feed showing colonists wandering the corridors in confusion. Some of them are experiencing multiple versions of themselves simultaneously. The human mind isn't designed to process quantum superposition. Show her, Dr. Rivera said quietly. Isabella pressed a sequence of commands, and a new image appeared. Earth, but not as they knew it. The planet was a kaleidoscope of possibilities, each time stream bleeding into the next. In some versions, civilization had reached utopian heights. In others, extinction events played out in endless loops. Your defiance didn't just challenge death, Isabella explained. It challenged the very concept of linear time. Every person who should have died but didn't, their continued existence is creating paradoxes, alternate timelines trying to resolve themselves. Jenna felt the weight of responsibility crushing down. How do we stop it? We don't, came a new voice. From the shadows emerged Professor Richard Torres, the colony's resident philosopher, and they now learned, another persistent. But we can direct it. Every rule has a loophole, Commander. Even the rules of death. Professor Torres approached the holographic display, his movements leaving trails of quantum possibilities in his wake. Death isn't just an entity. It's a fundamental force maintaining order in the universe. But what if that order is flawed? What if humanity's role isn't to submit to death, but to help it evolve? The medical bay lights flickered, and in each flash, they saw different versions of themselves. Some older, some younger, some barely recognizable. Reality was becoming fluid, malleable. We found something in the quantum readings, Isabella said, pulling up complex equations that seemed to move on their own. Each time someone refuses to die, they don't just deny death. They rewrite a small piece of universal law. If we could coordinate these rewrites, guide them with purpose, we could change the fundamental relationship between life and death, Kai finished. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the colony. The quantum destabilization was accelerating. Through the windows, they watched as multiple versions of Mars overlapped like double-exposed photographs. Death is trying to force our hand, Professor Torres observed. Make us see the chaos we've unleashed until we surrender willingly. But Jenna saw something else in the quantum chaos. Potential. Every timeline, every possibility was a thread in a larger tapestry. If they could just understand the pattern. Isabella, she said, can you isolate the quantum signature of a single defiance? Track exactly how reality changes when someone refuses to die. The physicist's eyes lit up with understanding. Yes, but... Oh. Her fingers flew over the controls. If we could synchronize multiple defiances, create a resonance pattern, we could stabilize the chaos, Professor Torres added, catching on. Not by stopping it, but by giving it structure, purpose. But before they could act on this revelation, the quantum distortions reached a critical point. The medical bay stretched and compressed, showing them glimpses of other possibilities. Versions where they'd failed, succeeded, never existed at all. Through it all, Jenna felt death watching. Not with anger now, but with something closer to curiosity. They weren't just breaking the rules anymore. They were trying to understand them, to reshape them into something new. Commander, Kai called out, his voice echoing strangely through the quantum fluctuations. We're picking up signals from other colonies, other timelines. We're not the only ones. All across space and time, humanity is beginning to wake up to the possibility that death isn't an end. It's a framework waiting to be redesigned. As reality continued to fracture around them, Jenna made a decision. They couldn't go back to the old rules, but they could forge new ones. Death had challenged her, thinking she would break under the weight of cosmic chaos. Instead, she and her team would use that chaos to rebuild the very foundations of existence. Begin the quantum synchronization, she ordered. It's time to show death that humanity doesn't just break rules. We transcend them. In the space between moments, where all possibilities existed simultaneously, Death watched with growing fascination as its game evolved into something unprecedented. The price of persistence was reality itself, but the reward might be something greater than even Death had imagined. The quantum synchronization chamber hummed with impossible energies as Commander Jenna Rhodes and her team prepared for what Isabella had dubbed the convergence. Around them, the walls of Mars' colony shifted between states of existence, each reality bleeding into the next like watercolors in rain. Quantum alignment at 60%, Isabella announced, her hands dancing through holographic displays that showed the fabric of reality itself. Each persistence timeline is beginning to harmonize. They had gathered all 23 of the colony's persistence, those who had refused death, in the chamber. Each one's defiance created its own unique ripple in reality, and together they hoped to turn those ripples into a tidal wave of change. Professor Torres monitored the philosophical implications through a device of his own design, the metaphysical resonance scanner. The fundamental laws are becoming flexible. It's as if reality itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what we'll do next. That's exactly what it's doing, came Death's voice, materializing in the center of the chamber. But this time, its form was different, less certain, more fluid. You clever, terrible creatures. You're not just breaking the rules anymore. You're making reality question its own nature. Jenna stepped forward. You gave me a challenge. Did you expect me to face it alone? I expected you to learn the cost of defiance and yield, Death replied, its voice echoing across multiple timelines simultaneously. Instead, you've turned my challenge into a revolution. Through the chamber's windows, they could see the effects of their work. The quantum fractures were no longer chaotic, but beginning to form patterns. Beautiful, impossible geometries that rewrote the very grammar of existence. Lieutenant Kai monitored the security feeds, which showed similar patterns emerging across the solar system. We're receiving signals from Europa Colony, Titan Station, even the Kuiper Belt outposts. The quantum resonance is spreading. You don't understand what you're risking, Death warned, but there was something new in its tone. Uncertainty. The laws of mortality exist for a reason. Without death, without endings. We're not eliminating death, Professor Torres interrupted, his eyes fixed on his readings. We're evolving it. Look at the patterns, really look at them. We're not destroying the cycle, we're expanding it. Isabella's screen showed the proof. Complex mathematical equations that described a new kind of existence, one where death was not an absolute end but a transformation, a choice. The quantum synchronization is allowing us to rewrite the fundamental contract between life and death, Isabella explained, her words leaving trails of probability in the air. Instead of a binary state, alive or dead, we're creating a spectrum of existence. Death moved through the chamber, its form shifting between states as it examined their work. A spectrum of existence, it repeated, as if tasting the concept. You would make mortality negotiable. We would make it collaborative, Jenna corrected. A partnership between the force you represent and the consciousness that exists within it. The quantum harmonics reached a crescendo, and reality itself seemed to hold its breath. In that moment of possibility, Jenna saw death's true form, not an end, but a transition, a doorway that had become a wall only because no one had thought to try opening it differently. 70% synchronization, Isabella called out. The quantum field is stabilizing, but something's happening. The patterns in reality began to shift, forming new configurations that even their instruments couldn't interpret. It was as if the universe itself was learning, adapting, evolving in response to their efforts. We're approaching a bifurcation point, Professor Torres announced, his voice tight with excitement and fear. A moment where the old rules and the new exist in perfect balance. Whatever happens next will determine the shape of existence itself. Death's form became more distinct, more present than Jenna had ever seen it. You understand that there's no going back from this. Even I don't know what existence will become if you succeed. Jenna looked around at her team. At Kai's steady determination, Isabella's brilliant curiosity, Torres's philosophical wonder, and all the other persistents who had chosen to challenge the most fundamental law of existence. Maybe that's exactly what the universe needs, she said. Not an end to death, but an evolution of it. A new way of understanding the relationship between existence and non-existence. The quantum synchronization reached 80%, and reality began to sing, a harmony of possibility that reached across time and space. In that moment, Jenna understood that they weren't just changing the rules of death. They were helping the universe itself grow beyond its original parameters. Death watched the transformation with what could only be described as fascination. In all the eons of existence, it mused, no species has ever. But before it could finish, the quantum field reached critical alignment, and everything, reality, time, existence itself, prepared to transform into something entirely new. The game had become more than a challenge between death and a defiant human. It had become an opportunity for the cosmos itself to evolve. As the quantum synchronization reached its peak, reality itself seemed to crystallize around the Mars colony. The chamber where Commander Jenna Rhodes and her team stood became a nexus point between all possible states of existence. Death's form shifted through countless manifestations, sometimes appearing as a void, sometimes as pure light, and sometimes as something beyond human comprehension. 90% synchronization, Isabella announced, her voice echoing across multiple dimensions. The quantum field it's not just stabilizing, it's evolving. Through the chamber's windows, they watched as the various versions of Mars began to merge, not into a single reality, but into a harmonious multiplicity of states. The red planet existed simultaneously as a barren wasteland, a terraformed paradise, and countless states in between, all perfectly balanced. The barriers are dissolving, Professor Torres observed, his metaphysical resonance scanner showing patterns that defied traditional physics, not just between life and death, but between all states of being. Death moved through the chamber, its presence now more curious than antagonistic. "You've done more than refuse to die," it said to Jenna. "You've taught existence itself to question its limitations." The quantum field suddenly pulsed, and everyone in the chamber experienced a moment of perfect clarity. They could see every death they'd ever avoided, every life they'd saved, every possibility that stemmed from their defiance. But instead of chaos, they saw purpose. "Look," Lieutenant Kai pointed to his security feeds, which showed similar transformations occurring across the solar system. "The effect is spreading. Earth, the other colonies, everything is changing." Isabella's instruments registered something unprecedented. The quantum field isn't just affecting physical reality anymore. It's restructuring the fundamental laws that govern existence itself. Death. It's becoming something new. Death's form stabilized into something both terrible and beautiful, a beam of pure potential. "You humans," it said, its voice carrying echoes of every ending and beginning in the universe. "I challenged you to understand the importance of endings, but instead, you've shown me the limitation of absolutes." The transformation reached its crescendo. Reality shimmered like a soap bubble about to pop, but instead of bursting, it expanded. The chamber filled with light that was also darkness, energy that was also matter, life that was also death. 100% synchronization, Isabella called out triumphantly. In that moment, everything changed. The universe shifted on its axis, and new laws wrote themselves into the fabric of existence. Death remained, but it was no longer an absolute end. Instead, it became a transition, a doorway that could be navigated by those with the will and wisdom to do so. "What have we become?" Kai wondered aloud, looking at his hands, which seemed both solid and ethereal. "Something more," Professor Torres answered, his eyes bright with understanding. "We've evolved beyond the binary of existence and non-existence. Death is no longer our enemy or our end. It's become part of our spectrum of being." Jenna turned to Death, expecting resistance or anger, but found only a kind of cosmic amusement. "You knew this would happen," she realized. "Your challenge, it wasn't about making me accept death. It was about pushing humanity to transform it." "I am as old as the universe," Death replied. "Its form now a comfortable mixture of ending and beginning. And in all that time, no species had ever considered that I too might need to evolve. Your refusal to die wasn't an act of defiance, it was an act of creation." The new reality settled into place. Across the solar system, humanity began to understand their new state of existence. Death remained a constant, but it was no longer a finality. Instead, it became a transition, a change of state that could be navigated by those with the understanding and will to do so. "So what happens now?" Jenna asked, standing at the threshold between what was and what could be. Death's response rippled across multiple levels of existence. Now we begin the real work. You've changed the rules, Commander Rhodes. You and your persistence have given the universe something it hasn't had in eons, the ability to surprise itself. The challenge isn't over. It's simply become more interesting. As the quantum field stabilized around them, Jenna looked at her team. The persistence who had helped reshape reality itself. They were no longer merely survivors who had refused to die. They had become pioneers of a new way of existing. The Mars colony hummed with new life, new possibilities. Outside, the multiple states of Mars coexisted in perfect harmony, a testament to the new nature of reality. Death remained, but it had become something more, a partner in the grand dance of existence rather than its terminal point. "We'll need to teach others," Professor Torres said, already thinking of the implications. "Help them understand this new way of being." "And continue to explore what's possible," Isabella added, her instruments showing layers of reality that had never been visible before. Jenna nodded, feeling the weight and wonder of what they had achieved. They had not conquered death. They had transcended it, transformed it into something greater than any of them had imagined possible. Death's final words echoed through the chamber as its form merged with the new fabric of reality. "The game continues, Commander. But now we play it together." And in that moment, as humanity stepped into its new existence, the universe itself seemed to smile at the endless possibilities that lay ahead.